Colons and rectums are not exactly the stuff of breakfast table conversation, but politely avoiding this topic is costing far too many lives. So please stop what you're doing, listen, and learn. These are the faces of colon cancer, some of whom lost their lives to the second leading cancer killer in the United States. Only lung cancer takes more lives, yet it's still a cancer that's rarely discussed and much misunderstood. Here are the facts. It's not just a man's disease. It's not a disease that affects only older Americans. It strikes people of all races. This year alone, over 130,000 people in the United States will get colon cancer. More than half will be women. A relatively small percentage, just 10%, will be under 50, but that's 13,000 people with a cancer that's commonly thought of as an old man's disease. The numbers are alarming and the results can be devastating, but it doesn't have to be that way. Colon cancer has a 90% cure rate, but only if it's detected early. Kathleen Malley never worried much about getting the disease, but she was a likely candidate. Her mother had colon cancer when she was in her mid-60s, as did her aunt. But because they both survived and lived until their 80s, Kathleen thought colon cancer just wasn't that serious.
Colon cancer never scared me. I was much more concerned with ovarian, uterine cancer, breast cancer.
We have been educating women about breast cancer, about cervix cancer, but colon cancer is a woman's disease as much as a man's disease.
Dr. Sidney Winower, Chief of Gastroenterology at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center.
I personally think that women think that the colon is something down around the prostate, and that doesn't involve them. I think there's a misconception on their part.
And of course, everybody's got a colon.
Everybody has a colon. The colon is the large bowel, or the large intestine. That is the last place that digested food goes before it becomes evacuated. It's in the abdominal cavity, and it's about 5 feet long.
What is colon cancer?
Colon cancer is cancer, like any other cancer, which means an uncontrolled growth which begins in the colon, or the large intestine. And it starts from a small, benign growth, a polyp.
Do all polyps eventually become cancerous growths?
No, most polyps stay benign. But when we find polyps, we can't tell which ones will grow and develop into cancer and which ones will not grow. So when we find polyps on examinations, we just remove them all.
Are there some people, Dr. Winower, who are more likely to develop polyps?
Yes. Everybody in this country is at risk beginning at age 50, men and women alike. But there are some people who are at higher risk. People who have a family history of colon cancer or colon polyps. People who have a long-standing history of inflammatory bowel disease like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's colitis. There are some people who have a family history or a personal history of other types of cancers who also are at higher risk for colon cancer, yes.
What kinds of cancers?
Breast cancer, if they have uterine cancer, they have a slightly higher risk of colon cancer.
Ovarian cancer?
Ovarian cancer as well. The family history is incredibly important for two reasons. It puts them at higher risk, and also their risk begins at a younger age, so they must be checked starting at a younger age.
While colon cancer wasn't on her list of major concerns, given her family history, Kathleen Malley had been giving herself a fecal occult test every year. It's a store-bought test you do at home, and it checks for hidden blood in the stool. Recent studies say the tests are not very accurate due to too many false positives, but it did help Kathleen.
I used to laugh about doing it because I felt, you know, this is not going to be very accurate. You take your own fecal matter and you smear it on paper.
And while it wasn't very appealing, it sounds as if it helped
Absolutely.
catch your cancer very early and
yes.
save your life.
Yes, very true.
Last October, Kathleen's fecal occult test was positive, even though she had absolutely no symptoms.
The symptoms that we commonly see with colon cancer are a change in bowel habits, bright red blood in the stool, and perhaps some abdominal pain or discomfort.
We should mention, though, that you don't necessarily have to see bright red blood in your toilet bowl to have blood in your stool.
Oh, that's correct.
And if your bowels are dark, it could indicate the presence of blood.
Yes. The most important thing to consider in colon cancer is that it is silent for a long period of time.
The scary part is that I felt healthy. I didn't feel sick. I think that this is probably the problem with a lot of people. They wait until they're sick. And if I had waited until I was sick, it probably would have been too late for me.
At first, Kathleen thought the positive test might be hemorrhoids, a mistake that too many doctors and patients often make. But Kathleen's doctor recommended a colonoscopy, which examines the inside of the colon, where a malignant tumor was in fact found. Because her tumor was the size of a golf ball, surgery was required. But because the cancer was contained in her colon, no follow-up chemotherapy was prescribed. Are you worried about a relapse or an appearance of another malignancy?
I think probably my concern now is I have a son who's 17 years old. This is something that he's going to have to watch himself, because I'm sure would be more of a tendency for him to develop a colon cancer. I came home from Sloan Kettering believing that the little things weren't going to bother me anymore. And I've had a second chance at life. I really believe that.
Baltimore Oriole Eric Davis is hoping for that same second chance. But unlike Kathleen, his cancer was more advanced and literally came out of left field.
You know, me being a professional baseball player for 18 years, you know, perfect health, perfect condition. Something that you just don't wake up and say, wow, I wonder if I'm going to have cancer today. No, it don't happen that way. But one day I went from first to third, and when I came out of the game, you know, I sat down to stretch and I couldn't get up. You know, I had problems getting up. My stomach really started bothering me. And I woke up that next morning just in excruciating pain, you know, like I've never felt before. So I knew something was wrong, you know, but I just didn't know what.
Only 34 at the time, Eric never suspected colon cancer, but his abdominal pains may have saved him because they forced him to check into a hospital. 5 days later, a malignant tumor, this one, yes, the size of a baseball, was found in his colon and removed immediately. No family history, no apparent blood in his stool. Because of his young age and the possibility of recurrence, Eric underwent 8 months of chemotherapy.
The hardest thing was sitting in there for 2 hours getting poison dispersed in your body. I didn't know how I would receive it, but I knew I had to take it.
Today he is back on the ball field full time, and at least for now, is cancer-free.
I love baseball. It's been part of my life for a long, long, long time, but it's not everything. You know, if I have to choose my health over playing baseball, I'll pull the uniform off right now.
The last weeks of the season, Davis with a shot that's fair. Sizzled it inside the bag and up the line.
You know, I enjoy my life. I live one day at a time. I can't worry about if my cancer comes back. I have to enjoy the time that I have.
Second double of the night for Eric in his many trips to the plate.
If you're interested in finding out more about colon cancer, call the National Cancer Institute's Cancer Information Service at 1-800-4CANCER. Colon cancer has a 90% cure rate if it's caught early, but only 20% of those who should get screened do. The very idea of a doctor examining your colon makes a lot of people squeamish, but the procedure isn't nearly as uncomfortable as many people fear.
Have you had any solid food today?
Nope,
Okay.
that's for sure.
Greg Zarowski, a 47-year-old school development director, is about to have his first colonoscopy. His mother had colon cancer when she was 49, so given his family history, Greg's doctor knew he needed to be screened. Did you have some trepidation, some fear about the whole procedure?
Oh, sure, yeah, it just sounded gross or invasive. I was sort of hoping he'd say, you know what, we don't really have to do something like this. You can go another 10 years or whatever. But he said immediately, no, you really should.
There are several screening methods for colon cancer. Colonoscopies are used to examine the entire inside of a colon. A lighted scope checks for polyps or other growths and is able to remove them during the examination. But the procedure is more expensive than other methods, and there is a slight risk of damage to the colon. A flexible sigmoidoscopy is highly accurate, and while it's less expensive than a colonoscopy, it only examines the lower third of the colon. Only half of most cancers occur there, so the upper colon is left completely unexamined. Barium X-rays photograph the entire colon, but can only detect large polyps or tumors. And when the barium X-ray does identify any abnormality, colonoscopy is usually recommended to confirm results. A fecal occult test, which can be done at home, is the most common and least expensive screening method. It searches for hidden blood in the stool. Studies now question the accuracy of the tests, saying they result in too many false positives. Also, this test must be combined with one of the other screening methods in order to be considered relevant. Dr. Sidney Winnower is the chief of gastroenterology at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York.
My own personal feeling is that colonoscopy is the test that I would recommend because it is the most accurate. It needs to be done only every 5 years, and polyps can be removed at that time.
Best taken on an empty stomach. I certainly have that.
Greg starts the day before his scheduled colonoscopy preparing for the big event by going on a liquid diet and drinking a strong laxative.
Last night you had to drink something that probably wasn't that tasty.
Yeah, it was not that bad. It was salty. It wasn't terrible at all. 4 glasses of water afterwards, and then wait 20 minutes or half an hour, and it starts to take effect.
It cleans your colon out,
Right,
in other words.
Right. And so I just stayed home, having ready access to the bathroom last night.
So Greg, I guess it's C day.
Yeah, now I get
colonoscopy
drugs.
day. Yeah,
right,
listen,
C day.
good luck.
Nice to meet you.
Greg's doctor is Mark Bochapin, a gastroenterologist at New York Hospital.
Because now really all you have to do is relax. You'll fall asleep with the medication, and the next thing you'll probably remember is the procedure being finished. When I'm doing a colonoscopy, the instrument is inserted in the rectum, and the instrument can be controlled with 2 dials. It's an up-down control and a left and right control. And the first part of the procedure is really just to get to the end of the colon, so that when we start withdrawing the instrument, we can take a very accurate look at the lining or the walls of the colon. We're all finished. Yeah, everything perfect. Not even a hint of a polyp. You did a great job with the prep. I got a terrific look. It's all normal, so great news. Okay, you all right?
I didn't feel queasy or sore or anything. I was fine. And getting your teeth cleaned is more uncomfortable in some cases, it seems to me.
With us this morning to clarify screening options and issues are Dr. Mark Bochapin from New York Presbyterian Hospital and Dr. Gregory Larkin, Director of Corporate Health Services for Eli Lilly and Company. Gentlemen, good morning. Nice to see you both. Dr. Bochapin, obviously Greg got through the procedure with flying colors, but so many people are terrified about this. Why?
Well, no one likes to have anything done to them, especially men, very afraid to have anything put either towards them or inside. And women have the option of going to a gynecologist once a year. They have an exam, and they sort of more familiar about cancer screening. But men are terrified about this, and it's really not a bad procedure.
The guidelines are a little bit confusing. At what age, we heard Dr. Winnower say the colonoscopy was pretty much the gold standard for screening. At what age should you get your first colonoscopy?
Well, the recommended guidelines are at age 50. But I have to tell you that there's a lot of patients that have a family history, not only of colon cancer, but other glandular cancers, breast and uterine and ovarian. And I think they need to speak to their doctors about possibly starting earlier at age 40. And if they have a very early incidence of cancer in their family, say at 35 or at 40, then they should really start 10 years before the youngest person got the cancer.
Where should you go to get a colonoscopy?
You should go to someone who's very well trained, very experienced, and someone who's going to take compassion. One of my mentors, Dr. Lawrence Brantz, once said that sometimes holding a hand is actually more important than examining it. And I think people need to have compassion when they do this procedure as well.
And what about getting it in a hospital setting? Is that necessary?
Not usually. Actually, most of the time for the average individual with normal risk, just doing it in an ambulatory setting or in the setting of a doctor's office would be fine. If someone has a lot of underlying medical illnesses or problems, then they probably should be in a hospital where they're better monitored.
We heard there were problems with fecal occult blood tests. Some false positives, some false negatives happen as well. Are they still a good screening method?
Yes, because they're very cheap, they're inexpensive, they're easy to do. They should be combined with something else, something like flexible sigmoidoscopy or colonoscopy. And then that way they're a help in terms of determining, the risk you're at.
Dr. Larkin, getting back to colonoscopies, so many insurance companies don't pay for them unless you have a family history or you have symptoms or you're over 50 or there's some kind of combination of those. But at Eli Lilly, you do pay for colonoscopies. How do you pay for it, or who do you pay for?
Okay. Well, we provide a screening colonoscopy for all of our members of our health plan over the age of 40, which includes retirees, employees, and spouses. We start at the age of 40, and we screen every 5 years. We have assumed that benefit because of our dedication to preventive health. And to build on Mark's point, the colonoscopy is perhaps the most exacting exam and quick exam for the cancers in the colon.
It is really quick. It takes what? How long to do the actual colonoscopy?
Between 20 minutes and 40 minutes at tops an hour. It's really not a bad exam, and I think people are so afraid of it. It's the anticipation that's the worst. The prep is not fun, but the procedure itself, what I tell patients, is the easy part. By the time they get there, the worst is over because they'll get some rest with the sedation and wake up and it'll be over.
At Eli Lilly, testing this way has really been beneficial. You have found how many people with cancerous polyps?
Yes. We have screened 2,500 since we started this program, and we have found 17 cancerous lesions in individuals that had no symptoms whatsoever, and these lesions were easily removed.
This saved the company a lot of money in the long run because it would have cost about $100,000 per person to take care of those people if that cancer hadn't been detected?
That's the direct cost estimate. There's also many indirect costs of lost productivity. And basically our company has always looked out for our people very well, and this is an investment that we're very willing to make.
Because most importantly, you've saved 17 lives so far.
Yes, and we've also removed a lot of polyps, 700 in fact, that many experts would claim that they were precancerous. So there's an untold preventive feature of a colonoscopy, just not for removing cancers, but precancerous lesions.
But if your insurance company won't pay for the procedure?
Well, you need to work with the insurance company, but if they don't pay for the procedure, it doesn't mean that you can't afford it yourself. It's life-saving. You have other expenses you pay. This may be one it's worth investing in.
Well, hopefully a lot of companies will follow your lead.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think it's important to state that we were able to get there because we partnered with gastroenterologists in the community. And I think there has to be more imaginative thinking on how to render good preventive care.
All right. Dr. Larkin and Dr. Pachapin, gentlemen, thank you so much for participating in this series. One in 17 people develop colon cancer in this country. It is not a rare disease. If someone in your immediate family has colon cancer, your chances of getting the disease can double or perhaps even triple. Some people at higher risk may in fact carry one of 3 known colon cancer genes. Discovering if you're a carrier can spare you and your family untold pain. At the Johns Hopkins Oncology Center, a series of blood tests have been created within the past 5 years under the leadership of Dr. Bert Vogelstein. These tests can detect any of 3 known colon cancer genes. When the gene is found early enough, the cancer is completely preventable. According to Dr. Vogelstein, 20% of all colon cancers are hereditary, so not everyone needs to be tested.
Genetic testing is advised only for people who have very strong family histories and who are likely to have a hereditary defect in their genes that can be identified through these tests. The first example comes from families with familial adenomatous polyposis, and individuals with that disease don't get a single colon tumor, they get multiple colon tumors, thousands of them.
But that gene is carried by a tiny 1% of colon cancer patients. Another gene discovered by Dr. Vogelstein just a year ago is the Ashkenazi gene and is much more prevalent.
There's a particular genetic alteration which can affect as many as 20% of the population. But so far, it's only known to affect Ashkenazi Jews. These are Jews who are of European origin. And this genetic defect places them at about twofold increased risk for colon cancer.
Meanwhile, this is a family devastated by a rare and powerful third kind of colon cancer gene called the Lynch syndrome.
Well, it all started with my father, who had 2 bouts with colon cancer, but ultimately died of a heart attack. And we began to think about his mother, who we were told died of stomach cancer. But in looking back, it probably was perhaps colon cancer. The next thing that happened was my sister Joan, who is 3 years younger than I am, contracted colon cancer at an early age, about age 37. And then a second bout with colon cancer when she was 50 or 51, and it spread quickly and took her life at that time.
Lynch's syndrome affects up to 5% of all colon cancer patients, and it's very difficult to detect.
There's no identifying marks in the patient other than the fact that they might get cancer. It's only diagnosable or suspectable on the basis of family history.
The next thing that happened as far as the spread of the disease is my brother John here contracted colon cancer again at an early age 37.
About the same age as Joan.
About the same age as Joan, although he's younger than Joan. Had a large tumor removed, and his entire colon was removed, and had chemotherapy also.
I figured my life was over. This is it. My sister's dead. My father's dead. I'm going to end up dead. I figured I had about 10 years to live.
Since John carries a colon cancer gene, his children are at risk for being carriers as well. His late sister Joan's family has already been hit with the 4th generation of colon cancer.
Joan had 4 children, and one of her daughters, Pamela, contracted colon cancer at the age of 28, the youngest, in the family so far.
It's been 5 years since John was first diagnosed, but his family history keeps him at high risk. For now, however, he is cancer-free.
So far, everything's been clean. They gave me a 5-year down the road prognosis that if nothing happens, I'm in the 95% range that it won't reoccur as far as any cancer coming back on me.
Dr. Randall Burt is an expert on the inheritance of colon cancer at the University of Utah, and Dr. Bernard Levine is a specialist in colon cancer prevention at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. Gentlemen, good morning to you. Dr. Burt, first of all, who should undergo gene testing?
Gene testing is only for those with the strongest family history of colon cancer.
Multiple relatives?
Multiple relatives that show a dominant pattern of inheritance in a family, or relatives that get colon cancer at a very young age, under 40, under 30. Those people and families should undergo genetic testing.
Let's talk about the people who don't carry these 3 specific genes or any of these genes, because this gene pool, so to speak, accounts for a very small percentage of the colon cancer population.
That's correct.
So for the other people, who is at risk?
Anyone with a family history of colon cancer is at increased risk for getting colon cancer.
And when you say a family history, are you talking about a great uncle, a grandmother, a mother, father, sister, who?
We start with close relatives. Anyone with a parent, brother, or sister with colon cancer has about a double risk of colon cancer. They should receive screening starting 10 years younger than the general population, or age 40. And it should be repeated screening of the colon every 5 years or so.
If they have a younger relative, let's say someone's mother got colon cancer when she was 42 years old, that person should be screened 10 years before, right, at age 32?
Yes, absolutely.
Also, there's some evidence that these glandular cancers are related. So even if you don't have colon cancer in your family, if you have ovarian, breast, uterine, and prostate, that you might want to see about being screened as well at an earlier age than 50.
Yes, even those cancers that you mentioned give about a 1.5-fold increased risk for colon cancer among relatives. And so screening is recommended probably starting at age 40.
Dr. Levine, what can people do to prevent this disease?
A healthy lifestyle that includes diet, high in vegetables, high in fiber, especially wheat bran cereals, low in fat, low in red meat, avoidance of tobacco completely, that includes smoking and chewing tobacco, maintenance of a healthy weight, avoidance of obesity, and exercise. Those are the components of a healthy lifestyle, and probably starting at an early age.
It's interesting to note that in some African countries and in Japan, there's very little colon cancer. Why is that?
Well, we think that is because up to now they have followed a very healthy diet, particularly low in fat and low in red meat. But in fact, the incidence of colorectal cancer in Japan is increasing, as it is in China, because they are adopting a Western diet.
What about taking aspirin or vitamins? We've heard some talk of those things.
I think it's too early to make that a routine recommendation. I think research that is currently being done will in the future allow us to make recommendations for people at high risk, people who form polyps, people who've had polyps removed, and they may benefit particularly from aspirin or derivatives of aspirin, or perhaps vitamins, but we shouldn't be recommending that currently.
Dr. Levine, it seems doctors are reporting that they're seeing younger and younger patients with this disease. What's going on here?
I think all of us are beginning to suspect that this is occurring. Also, research that we've been doing suggests that this is happening in other parts of the world, such as studies in Egypt or Hong Kong. And there we think it may be some environmental effects as well as the genetic inheritance, but probably predominantly it's environmental.
Do you suspect things like pesticides or chemical additives that we have in the diet of most Americans, that may be contributing to this?
In some parts of the world, we definitely believe it may be pesticide or herbicide related. In this country, I don't think we've explored the genetic possibilities enough to answer that question. But it may be that there is a combination of interactions between the gene and the environment.
All right. Dr. Bernard Levine and Dr. Randy Burt, thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Katie.
For more information on this and other aspects of colon cancer, you can call the National Cancer Institute's Cancer Information Service at 1-800-4CANCER. Tomorrow on part 4 of our series, we'll take a look at how colon cancer is treated once it is diagnosed. If a cancerous tumor is found, it's likely that surgery will be necessary. So we begin in the operating room at Howard University with Dr. LaSalle Lafall Jr.
Clamp tight, please. The first thing we do when we enter the abdominal cavity is try to determine if this tumor is localized. Has it spread to some distant site? Has it spread to the liver? Are the lymph nodes, those nodes that drain the tumor, are they involved? Because if it's localized, we know that patient has a very good chance to be cured. And that's what we want to do. We want to cure the patient. Spun stick, please. People are frightened when they hear about colorectal cancer and a potential operation because they think about the fact that they may have to wear a bag. They know someone who's had an operation for colorectal cancer and had to wear a bag.
Wearing a bag or having a colostomy means losing normal bowel function. Instead, the colostomy bag is applied over the end of the intestine to catch fecal matter.
But what we know today is that only maybe 5–6% of patients who have cancers of the large intestine and rectum must have a colostomy, a permanent colostomy. Sometimes we have to do a temporary colostomy, perform a temporary colostomy, but not a permanent one. So the thing we like to emphasize is you come in, you can have an operation, we can join the intestinal tract, put the ends together so that the patient has normal function as before and does not have to wear a bag, does not have to have a colostomy. So 2-0 chromic, 3-0 black silk for the anastomosis.
After completing the surgery, Dr. Lafall showed us the patient's tumor.
That's the cancer. This is the polyp, a polyp, that's another polyp. But this is the cancer. See, that has a broad base. And we know this is cancer. It looks like cancer, but even more than that, we biopsied it.
Which hand did we use yesterday? This one. Okay.
If there are any concerns about the cancer spreading, the patient receives follow-up treatments of chemotherapy, radiation, or both. These treatments are used to destroy cancer cells and stop them from growing. Dr. Robert Mayer of Boston's Dana-Farber Institute.
So overall, more than half of patients with colorectal cancer will sometime during the course of their treatment receive chemotherapy. The chemotherapy is given by a drip, which may last from 15 minutes to 2–2.5 hours. It's given on an outpatient basis, and most of our patients who have employment are able to work throughout the time of their treatment. It's very rare for patients who are treated for colorectal cancer with chemotherapy to have significant nausea and vomiting or to lose their hair. Radiation therapy is generally given only to those patients who have a rectal cancer. And rectal cancer now comprises 25 to 30% of large bowel tumors. And the radiation is given to prevent the possibility of there being cells that would lead to a recurrence in the pelvis after an operation. Okay, real big breath.
Both Dr. Mayer and Dr. LaFalle aim to prolong the life of every patient they treat, but their services wouldn't even be required if everyone became aware that we're all at risk and need to be screened.
Most times when people have spread of disease, they have had a colon cancer for 5 years, for 6 years, at least starting with a polyp. And the importance of regular checkups, of regular screening, of not being afraid of something that is preventable, that is treatable, that is curable, cannot be overemphasized.
People talk about pap smears, you can talk about the breast. See, it's not considered overly polite to talk about the rectum, the large intestine, talk about stools for blood examination. Oh, let's not talk about that. But you have to talk about it, because by talking about it, we may save lives.
And here to talk about it some more, Dr. LaSalle LaFalle, Jr. of Howard University Hospital and Dr. Robert Mayer of the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. I know that Dr. LaFalle, you are a surgical oncologist, but does it matter what kind of doctor, what kind of surgeon you get to perform this operation if, in fact, you do have colon cancer and need surgery?
The important thing is to be absolutely certain that you get a doctor who has had the appropriate experience. For example, there are some surgeons who may operate on the colon, but when you have a tumor or cancer of the lower part of the rectum, they may not feel comfortable doing it, may not have the experience. So the important thing is to choose a surgeon who has had the proper experience doing that kind of procedure you need.
Dr. LaFalle, you talked about during the surgery how one of the first things you do is you try to determine if it's traveled to any distant sites, for example, the liver, and oftentimes if colon cancer does go to another site, it goes to the liver. But these days, that's not necessarily a death sentence, because now you can actually resect part of the affected liver?
That is correct. We must say that most patients who have spread to the liver are not able to have their cancers resected, but of those who are able to have the cancer that has spread to the liver, to have it resected, we can have cure rates of up to 20 to 25%. 1 in 4 or 5 patients can have operations for cure when you remove that cancer that has spread to the liver.
Which is
so
amazing.
That's important.
Yeah, and you
yes.
can actually cut out the cancerous part, and the liver regenerates.
And it does regenerate.
The liver is an amazing organ, isn't it?
It is.
Let's talk about lymph node involvement. If you determine that the lymph nodes do have some cancer, and the lymph nodes are in a way a gateway to the rest of the body, then you decide that chemotherapy is in order.
If the lymph nodes are involved, then we'll send those patients to have chemotherapy if they have cancers of the colon.
Dr. Mayer, in I guess about 5 to 10 years ago, these people who had lymph node involvement did not receive chemotherapy to prevent the spread of cancer, but now it's fairly routine, correct?
It's absolutely true. For many years, it was thought that chemotherapy was ineffective in this situation. We now have compelling data that upwards of 40% of patients who are treated will have less likelihood of recurrence, and upwards of a third of patients who are treated will be cured in addition to what surgery alone would have provided.
When it comes to advanced colon cancer, 5-FU and leucovorin, but 5-FU has been used as chemotherapy as the first-line attack since the 1950s, and only recently has another drug, CPT-11, been approved by the FDA for widespread use. Why aren't there more chemotherapies, or why haven't there been more strides in this area?
Colon cancer turns out to be a tough critter to treat. However, in the last few years, there have been steps that have advanced our ability to handle the disease. You mentioned a new drug. There are actually 2 or 3 new drugs, and there are actually forms now of specific treatment aimed at molecular aberrancies, molecular abnormalities in the tumors, which may be able to provide very specific treatment with much less side effect.
What about clinical trials, Dr. Mayer?
Clinical trials represent, I believe, the hope for the future for the cancer patient in general and the colorectal cancer patient in particular. Clinical trials offer patients new treatments, offer them treatments in a prescribed manner, and the data that we know of show that patients who are part of clinical studies actually have a better outcome than those who are not part of clinical studies, probably because they're being observed more carefully, being treated more effectively, being watched more closely.
But how do you find out about them? It's so hard.
It is difficult. It is difficult. The National Cancer Institute has a internet PDQ, which is jargon for a network to indicate different types of studies that are available for patients. I think what is essential is that each patient have a physician, a guide, a mentor, to help them translate this.
Well, Dr. Mayer and Dr. LaFalle, thank you so much for taking part in this important series. We appreciate it. For more information on treatment and other colon cancer issues, call the National Cancer Institute's Cancer Information Service at 1-800-4CANCER. This morning on the final day of our series, Confronting Colon Cancer, we take a look at the future and explore cutting-edge treatments and screening devices. For that, we called on NBC's chief science correspondent, Robert Bazell.
Dr. Richard Pazder of the MD Anderson Cancer Center is frustrated with the treatments he can offer patients whose colon cancer spreads after surgery.
One of the problems that we've had is that patients have had one drug.
That one drug, 5-FU, a chemotherapy infusion developed in the 1950s, does not always work.
And then the question that the patient asks the doctor and his staff, what's next? And unfortunately, there hasn't been any answer to that question, what's next?
Tell me your number, please.
But now there are new drugs. Kay Walter's doctors offered her an experimental drug called Panarex, an antibody produced through genetic engineering. She gets it in addition to 5-FU.
This is just something a little extra that we felt like was a little bit more insurance.
And other new drugs, including oxaliplatin and Captosar, are proving effective in clinical trials.
It's going to change the practice because we'll now have opportunities to use drugs and offer these drugs to patients where there was simply no other therapy.
One of Pazder's patients is Robert Bouchard, a 41-year-old Houston fireman. He learned he had advanced colon cancer 18 months ago.
I'd been told to get my life in order, so I felt that we needed to do everything aggressively that we could possibly do.
But what he feared was the chemotherapy that followed his surgery.
I envisioned that I was going to have hair loss, that I was going to be debilitated, your worst nightmare.
Instead of the usual 5-FU infusion, he got a new drug called Orzel, similar to 5-FU, but it's taken as a pill. He never missed work.
I was able to continue working at the fire station and continue my jobs and duties with very few side effects.
At the National Cancer Institute, Dr. Samir Khalif is trying an entirely different approach. Using patients' own tumors, he tailors vaccines that are designed to get the body's immune system to attack the cancer.
Not a lot of people had gotten this before.
Gary Geib, fighting colon cancer since 1991, is getting his first experimental vaccine.
We hope that it would be a very promising therapy, and we're very excited about it. But again, it definitely needs to be proven.
Because all molecules are three-dimensional.
And scientists at companies like Bristol-Myers Squibb are looking even further into the future. They showed us how they use 3D imaging of key molecules and the latest genetic techniques to design new cancer drugs.
I think over the next decade it'll probably revolutionize cancer treatment.
But no matter how good the treatments of the future may be, they will never be better than preventing cancer in the first place, or in the case of colon cancer, at least detecting it before it spreads outside the colon. For detection, colonoscopy remains the gold standard. But some experts say it is far too expensive for routine screening. A possible alternative, a test being studied at Exact Laboratories that searches for the genetic mutations associated with colon cancer in stool samples. Another experimental alternative is the virtual colonoscopy. It is a CAT scan X-ray that should allow doctors to find either early colon cancer or polyps, the precursors of cancer, without going inside the colon.
It's a virtual reality where you can fly through an imaginary simulation of the inside of your colon on your computer.
Bob, you want to take my gear? Yeah.
Such tests should someday keep people like Robert Bouchard from getting colon cancer. For now, experimental drugs are helping him get on with his life so he can help others. For today, Robert Bazell, NBC News, New York.
To conclude our series, we've invited some of the doctors who've been participating to offer some final thoughts on where we go from here. Dr. Sidney Winnower of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, the University of Utah's Dr. Randall Burt, Dr. Bernard Levine of Houston's MD Anderson Cancer Center, Dr. Robert Mayer of Boston's Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and Howard University's Dr. LaSalle Lafall Jr. Good morning, and thanks again for joining us. Dr. Burt, let me start with you. So many people who should be screened are not, correct?
That's correct. The most important point is to get colon cancer screening. It works. And one should get screening before symptoms develop. Once symptoms occur, colon cancer may often not be curable. Secondly, know your family history. You may be at increased risk if you have a family history. 10% of people in this country have a positive family history for colon cancer and may need special screening, starting at an earlier age or more vigorous screening.
So start screening at age 50, and if you have a history of colon cancer of other glandular cancers in your family, you may need to start much earlier.
That's correct. Prostate, breast, uterine, and ovarian cancer also in relatives slightly increases one's risk for colon cancer, and one needs to know that history to be sure and get screening.
Dr. Levine, what about lifestyle? What can you do to try to stave off this disease?
A healthy lifestyle will reduce the risk of colorectal cancer, and that includes diet, it includes regular exercise, avoidance of tobacco entirely, and maintenance of a healthy body weight, avoidance of obesity. We also know that specific components of the diet might include low intake of fat and red meat, and intake of low-fat dairy products at a good enough level to give oneself enough daily calcium.
And high fiber, right?
And high fiber would include wheat bran and other cereals derived from high fiber. But I really think it's very important to link lifestyle as well to screening. One shouldn't use the excuse of a good lifestyle to avoid screening. Screening with the tools we have currently available is still a very important part of preventing and detecting colorectal cancer at an early age.
In fact, Dr. Winnower, we saw a lot of exciting things on the horizon, but you say don't put too much stock in them. Why?
There's lots of exciting research on the horizon, as you said, Katie, but right now we understand how colon cancer develops. It doesn't come out of the clear blue sky. A small benign growth starts first and then slowly develops into a colon cancer over many years, 10 or 15 years. That's the period of time that we call silent. People are well. That's the time to take action. Follow a good lifestyle. Go for screening. Find out about your family history. That's the time when we can save lives, and we can do it today.
Dr. Lafall, I know that a lot of people who come to you and have to have surgery say they didn't want to come to a doctor. Why?
So many of these patients state, I was so afraid I'd have to wear the bag. And only about 5 or 6% of patients who have cancer of the large intestine and rectum must have a permanent colostomy or wear a bag. And we like to say this, if you make the diagnosis early, cancer of the large intestine and rectum, the colon and rectum, can be cured, and patients can have normal bowel function because the cancer can be removed and the ends of the intestine joined together. Patients have normal function without a colostomy. Cancer of the colon and rectum can be cured when the diagnosis is made early. And we can't emphasize that too much.
So no excuses, no fears, no embarrassment.
Not at all.
And Dr. Mayer, in closing, you feel like people really need to take control of their own health care.
Yes, there's no substitute for that. The healthcare system is good, but each of us have to be individuals. We need to know our family history. If we're not happy with the recommendations we're getting about screening, go somewhere else. If you're not happy about recommendations about treatment of a colon cancer has been found, go get a second opinion. Each of us needs to make those decisions for ourselves.
Well, hopefully the numbers will decrease as a result of this series. I can't thank you all enough for coming in and for helping us talk about something that isn't talked about nearly enough in this country, and I so appreciate your participation.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.